Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're having a little bit different discussion tonight. I'm trying to make some changes in how we do things and with some editing, and I'm still working on camera and lighting, but we're going to talk about human trafficking. But before we get started, go ahead, like, subscribe. If you like what I have to say, give me some comments. We'll talk about what's going on. I am learning some new stuff, as I said in the update video, based on some input I've gotten from channel members and especially from my nephew. So we're going to work on trying some new things. Like, subscribe, give me some comments. If you disagree with what I'm saying, then go ahead and disagree and let me know why in the comments. We can have a civil debate about it and we can talk about what's going on. Now, human trafficking. My thing with human trafficking goes back way before I started a YouTube channel. In fact, my undergraduate dual major in international relations and economics, and my thesis was actually written on human trafficking that I used to graduate. And it's something that's been near and dear to my heart. So it's very important. And it also feeds into when I gave the expectations for the Biden administration on meaningful immigration reform, that has a huge effect on human trafficking crossing international borders. And when it comes to the border of the United States of America, it's not closing the border, it's not completely opening the border, it's meaningful reform. So that people that truly can claim refugee status can get here, but cartels can't take advantage of it. Now, with that being said, we're going to get into some information about human trafficking. Now, according to Homeland Security itself, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, including right here in the United States. It can happen in a community where victims can be any age, race, gender, or nationality. Traffickers may use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationships to lure victims into trafficking situations. And this is important to read the definition because many people automatically assume that the victims of human trafficking are simply women and children. But that is just not the case. And if you look at worldwide, there are currently more people enslaved worldwide than there were prior to the end of what we consider slavery in the mid-19th century. Now, what is, and I'm pulling up these websites and I'll link them in the description. But slavery today is a good way to look at it because when you look at it, you have child slavery, child marriage, descent-based slavery, domestic slavery, which actually happens in the United States. There's been reported cases of it. And beyond domestic slavery, you have undocumented immigrants that have come across the border that are taken advantage of in places like the southern United States, along the Mexican border, which once again goes back to why meaningful immigration reform matters. The statistics of human trafficking are really mind-boggling. And with the YouTube algorithm, you have to be very careful how you state things. And it has nothing to do, honestly, with this video when it comes to monetization. It's more of, I want this video to be out there, so I'm trying to be very careful of what I say and what keywords I use. And I want people to see this and understand what's going on. So although I'm not going to read it out loud, up on the screen, you can see the statistics of human trafficking. And a victim, on average, just look at that and let that number sink in. 1 in 6 children missing in the United States was likely a victim. The average victim has a life expectancy of 7 years. California and Texas consistently have the highest number of reports, but that's only the reports that are made. And look at the percentage of girls born in red light districts. What will happen to them and how they will die. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that, regardless of where you are, that large silent population, let's start speaking out about this. Use your social media presence. Make these things known. Now, with this, it's one of the fastest growing crimes in the world. And part of it being the fastest growing crime in the world is when you look up statistics, you have victims that will not testify against their abuser. They won't, because of fear. And it's very hard without a victim to prosecute somebody for what they're doing. And many times, even if they're caught, they serve less time than drug smugglers do for what they've done. So I ask you again, is this or is this not something that we should be campaigning against? It's very near and dear to me from a standpoint of a father of daughters. But if you think about it, it is something that affects children of all ages and both sexes. And I know this popular thing of gender neutral and this and that, but in the end, when it comes down to this, it is gender neutral. When are we going to do something to try to fix this? Now, I know you condemn this president, that president for what they've done at the border. But when you have people in other nations that will basically buy your child, and because you're poor, that is the only option you have. And you hear stories about this. And after being stationed in Korea when I was in the military, I actually did sit down and talk to some girls from Eastern Europe that were in these bars. And for the record, no, I did not pay for anything. I did have some drinks and actually talk to them. And it was slow night, so there was nothing else going on. They were recruited with a contract to be a dancer or be an entertainer. Most of them actually knew the truth about what was going on. And yet they still chose to do it because they could make more money doing that than they could in their own countries. Now, take that against a 14 or 15-year-old runaway from the Midwest who links up with a guy that tells them, I'm going to do all these things for you. Or even more scary, a kind and understanding and seemingly loving older mom figure, and they pull him into these organizations. And they're forced into doing things that they shouldn't be forced into doing, not at their age. And I'm going to these websites and I'm going to link you to all of them, because the scary part to me is the national hotline statistics for the human trafficking online. Since December of 2007, there's been 276,000 contacts, 63,000, well, in excess of 63,000 human trafficking cases reported. But there's been 48,000 contacts this year. So that gives you an idea of the level of the problem. This is something we all need to look for. Now, if you go to the United Nations, they combine the Office of Drugs and Crime with human trafficking. And when you go through the website and actually start looking at some of this stuff, it's actually very scary, because of the fact that it happens. And as somebody who lives in the Midwest, I live in the state of Missouri. Looking up statistics when I was doing my thesis, The number of confirmed and suspected human trafficking cases in many of these states within the United States is mind-boggling. And it's mind-boggling because what starts off generally as a teenage runaway and what happens to them, or even younger, because they say that with males, there's actually a market for younger males than teenagers. With females, as teenagers. Ladies and gentlemen, are we going to do something to try to make a change in this? Or are we going to let this keep happening? I will say this, like it, dislike it, whatever. But under the Trump administration, there were arrests and there were children that were found. And I'm not talking about the QAnon. I'm not talking about the tunnels underneath Central Park in New York City. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the legitimate crackdown from the federal marshals and going after these organizations and rescuing children. I'm talking about the federal marshals diverting resources from the Fugitive Task Force to look for missing children. And this was very successful. What I would like to see going through the next 4 years under the Biden administration is we continue to use these resources to rescue these victims. And what I would like to see as my subscribers, that you start making your presence known on social media, in Twitter and Instagram, and start talking about what happens with human trafficking and start demanding programs. Working with the homeless court in Springfield, Missouri, I actually came into contact with a young lady who was 20 years old. She had been trafficked as a 12-year-old. Her life at this point, at 20, was one of abuse and more abuse and more abuse. And now, as a young adult, she was in a program where there was a treatment team. There was a very successful businesswoman who volunteered to mentor her. There was a judge who said, here's what we're going to do to help you try to move to the next part of your life. And although my place in the court was mostly to work with veterans, I was able to see this and realize that it happens in Springfield, Missouri, in the heart of the Midwest. And you still have victims of this right there. So what I would say to anyone watching this is research the subject, look into it, and then make your voice heard. If you're a parent, then you understand the thought of this is so scary. The fact that this could happen to one of your children or grandchildren. It's a scary thing. But it's happening across the world. As I said, Springfield, Missouri. It doesn't get much more heart of the Midwest American than that. And yet there was a victim right there. When we do homeless court sessions, she sat right there. So make your voice heard. Understand the problem that's out there. There are millions of victims every year across the world. The stats right now tell us there are more people involved in human trafficking and enslaved than there ever has been before. And that is through the United States. That is through Northern Africa. That is through Europe. And whether it's domestic servancy or it's sex slavery, it's still human trafficking. It's still enslaving people. So at some point, we really need to decide that we're going to stand up and we're going to make a change. And I always talk about the silent majority. Well, let's stop being silent. You have social media. You can bring these issues up. You can hold your politicians accountable. You can cause them to create effective legislation. You can bring up to them Some states have laws in the books, other states don't, where if you can prove somebody has been put in this position, then they cannot be charged for being forced into doing something. These are the things we need to talk about. These are the things that we need to change, that we can force a change. What I would ask you as a silent majority is use your voice, make your voice heard. Force our elected officials to address these issues. Continue what the federal marshals and local and state police have done through the last 4 years. Let's continue to find these victims. Let's continue to rescue these victims. Let's do the right thing by the ones that truly deserve it. Ladies and gentlemen, just stop and think about it. If you like what I have to say, like, subscribe, let me know in the comments. If you like the changes to what I'm doing, because I'm working on editing and things like this based on some advice I've gotten. If you disagree with me, hit dislike and tell me why in the comments. When it comes to human trafficking, if you dislike, I guarantee you're not going to change my mind. With that, everybody have a good evening. Be safe. Keep your family safe. And for God's sake, speak up.